Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat learning session with TBA Rabbinic Intern Ben Sigal.
Just a little bit of background on what we're going to look at today. We just read it actually, so we're skipping ahead from Lech Lecha to Vayera, which we just read. In between I'm guessing, did any of the minyanim do a full kriya today? Probably. From the second year triennial reading, at least, we skip ahead. We hear about the birth of Yishmael. Yishmael is no longer with Avram at that point. Avram becomes Abraham. I'm probably getting things out of order. And Avraham and Sarah are promised that they'll have a kid. And at the end of what we read this morning, Avraham circumcises himself at God's command. And what happens in what we read is three guests, three individuals, the Midrash tells us that they're angels, and that they all have specific purposes. They come and visit Avraham, who's sitting at the opening of his tent, and he welcomes them in, and Sarah's in the back, and he tells Sarah to bake because that's what happened. Sarah's listening into the whole conversation and what is going on, and Avraham is promised that he's going to have kids. Not the first time he's promised this. And actually, if you look in earlier parts in last week's Parsha, he's kind of not fully trusting of this every time he hears it either. But what we read in this week's Parsha is Sarah having a similar reaction. I'm going to put this out there just if people want to use it. But I'm going to read just so that those on Zoom can listen in. So we're in, I think it was the second or third Aliyah that we read. Then one said, this is one of the individuals that came to visit, "I will return to you next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son." Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "Now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am?'" So what's going on here? It's fairly straightforward.
I was stretching.
What did we just read?
Basically what it says, that she's wondering how she could possibly have a child at her age.
Yep. So Sarah's kind of incredulous at this idea that she's old. She's, by all accounts, not expecting to be fertile. Right. And she's told that she's going to have a kid.
Question?
Yes.
So why does the text say, why does Hashem quote her and misquote her slightly? And why is it that we get all of this commentary from the rabbis and the text itself, the Torah itself, regarding her laughing at the idea, but God kind of overlooks when Abraham laughs at it in the section that we didn't read today, if we were doing a triennial. But I think that's why you asked, did anyone do full Kriya?
Yeah, it's a little bit of it. We're not going to be dealing as much with the second part. And to be honest, I'm not 100% sure why it is that the rabbis don't like criticizing Abraham as much as they like criticizing Sarah. I have some guesses, but it's just guesses. So I'm not really going to focus on that as much. But what I do want to focus on is the fact that God does not directly quote Sarah at all. it's a decent rewording of what happened, but it's not for someone that we expect to be honest with us, to be the beacon of honesty. It's kind of takes away what she's saying, right? So she says, now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? And God says, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am? What are the differences in what's being said? We can I think the similarities are kind of obvious there. I just want to highlight the differences because this is what the commentaries are going to get into.
He's sparing Abraham's feelings. He's not saying you're old. She's saying that she's old.
Yeah, she's saying she's less focused on the fact that she's past her childbearing years, and she's more focused on the fact that Abraham is old. Was that any other thoughts? So one idea, by the way, behind this that we'll look at is this idea that it's sparing Abraham's feelings.
But at that time, his name isn't Abraham. It's Abraham.
It is Abraham. He's Abraham and she's Sarah. So
He was Abraham and she was Sarai, and then later on she became Sarah.
But that was that was this morning's Parsha. We already start this Parsha with their names having been changed. Oh, is that, no, not a hand. Okay. Is that a hand? Okay, great.
Is she suggesting having fun with marital relations? God is saying having a child.
That's another potential idea, is that and I don't remember that any of the commentaries get into it. Wouldn't shock me that they don't necessarily want to talk about that, although sometimes they do. But one idea that Jerry mentioned is this idea that maybe she's more focused on the marital relations aspect and God is more focused on the childbirth aspect. Yes. Another great question that we also are not, I don't think, going to necessarily touch on, but it's a great question to at least bring up, is why is God not talking to Sarah directly? We're not going to see, as far as I'm aware, God never, the only answer I could give you is that as far as I'm aware, God never really talks to Sarah directly.
Did God talk to women?
Yeah, I'm not really aware. Don't quote me on this because I'm not certain of what I'm about to say, but I'm not aware in Torah of God talking directly to any woman. Maybe Chava. Hagar, Hagar is a good one, which actually happened last Parsha, and Chava, but none of the matriarchs have a verbal relationship with God that is in text. Doesn't mean that the rabbis don't look into that at all. But that might be one reason why is there are plenty of other potential reasons as well.
Quick observation.
AJ, and then we'll go ahead.
I can wait. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, AJ.
Just if you think about it, Sarah is represented as a seer. It's like she's the visual person. Abraham listens and speaks. So he's more the oral person.
Yeah, beautiful.
So the statement that Sarah had stopped having the period of woman, did you say that?
Yeah, that's almost it's a pretty accurate translation of what it's saying. It's very clear that what the Torah is saying is that she is past whatever fertile window she had, or what would be expected at least. Because clearly we know the story. She's going to have a kid, regardless of the fact that she's way past.
Well, the age really is just secondary. I mean, age really doesn't matter. I mean, we have to know that.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah. So
it says that she's not, that she stopped having periods. Does that imply? I'd ask.
It's going to imply the miraculousness of what we're about to see. Yeah, this idea that she hasn't had a period, implies some sort of miraculousness to this birth, and also implies a realism to what she's saying, right? We're not really, the commentators are going to go all over the place with how could she question God, all of that. She's asking a realistic question. How am I supposed to be able to have a kid when it doesn't seem, when all the biological markers are saying I shouldn't be able to? It's not a ridiculous question, and the commentators sometimes lose sight of that. I want to move on and look at a couple of these commentaries that are going to look at explanations of what happens, because we're going to see that what happens here seems to set Sarah up for her response to this whole situation. So the first one comes from Ramban, who's a Spanish commentator, I think 1300s. He's commenting on God. This is all on what God is saying that she said, even though it's not really quite what she said. And all these commentaries are going to look at that. So I being old is God's rephrasing. This is an explanation of Sarah's words, after I am waxed old. Different translation, same idea as to what she said. And God's words that Sarah had said, I being old, were true, but for the sake of peace, God did not reveal what she also said, namely, my Lord being old also. For if God were quoting Sarah, God should have said, I and my Lord are old, as Sarah had laughed concerning both of them. So what's Ramban's explanation of the events?
He agreed with me.
He agreed with you, exactly. Wonderful. More specifically, though?
That, like, age doesn't matter. Age doesn't matter. It's just like what Sarah's saying, like, I'm getting older and I'm getting more wiser, and it's basically part of life, you know? Like, you're at a certain age, you're like 79, but you feel a little bit younger in your age. That's what Sarah's saying. Sarah's saying, I'm not old, I'm young, I'm getting younger. Like with God, God's like saying, well, you're old. And she's saying, no, I'm young. The age does not matter.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that I quite read that.
It.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that it's a possible explanation for why she might be saying it, but I don't think it's what Ramban's saying
That's why
here.
I don't see that anywhere in the text. I don't see
So,
that.
other thoughts?
Sorry.
What's Ramban saying here? Do you want to just restate what you said, even?
He's just sparing Abraham's feelings.
So his explanation is that God is sparing Avram's feelings. He does add one thing that I want to mention, is he's picking up on the fact that Sarah does say that she's old. She says, Acharai blo tiv haita li edena va'adoni zaken. She's saying both I'm old and Avram's old. But what we pick up on is specifically the fact that she uses different language, right? She's saying that she's withered. There's all these different commentaries on what she's exactly saying, that her skin may not be quite as, might be more wrinkled now than it was before. But the word, she doesn't directly refer to herself as old. And at the same time, she's calling herself old. Whereas with Avraham, she's saying he's old, like verbatim. So there's something different going on there. So what's Ramban's proposed fix for why it is that God isn't being completely honest then? It's kind of what you were saying. It's this idea that he is trying to spare, God is trying to spare Sarah's feelings. Avram's feelings, sorry.
Abraham's feelings.
Yeah. So here's the open question to the group. How do you feel about using that as a reason to be less than truthful? It's a legitimate...
Whether she mentioned Abraham as being old, that's not the issue. The issue is, how is this woman that bird are going to have a child. That's the.
I mean, I think that's a larger, this idea of God is still picking up on the fact that she's saying, how am I possibly going to have this child? Yes, that is a separate conversation that we could also get into.
That's the
but
only one that's even
but
relevant. I mean, that's even, who cares? Husbands and wives say all kinds of things to each other.
Interesting.
You can take something from a text, it's good. So we're trying to take even more from the text.
Right. So I get that, and I hear this idea that it is important to talk about the fact that Sarah's saying is focusing on how miraculous this would have to be. And I think that's part of what the text is getting at. But I do also want to focus on the fact that God is not quoting her directly. And the rabbis are picking up on that and wanting to answer this question of why would it be okay for God to not be honest? Especially given the fact that, and they're framing this, and I should have added this into the framing as well, that what happens after this incident is God asks to God's self, I know what I'm about to do in Sodom and Amorah. I should probably tell Abraham about this, right? Like God eventually questions God's self about honesty. So that puts this honesty question all the more so into focus. David? Yeah.
In the prime of my life.
Yeah.
I have another point to that.
Great. So I want to hold that thought, because we're going to go into the Talmud about this idea of trying to keep peace in the household. That's something that the Talmud is going to pick up on, Talmud coming before Ramban. But I do want to ask the general question of, does that feel like a good reason to not be completely honest?
No, I don't think
Sparing
so.
a spouse's feelings does not feel like a good reason to be completely honest. I'm open to both sides of the argument.
Because when you're old, you know it.
When you're old, you know it, is one of the ideas that's being brought out here.
You're not 19 anymore, you know.
Yeah, you're not, you're 18.
So it's not even like this would be sparing Abraham. If I hear what you're saying it wouldn't really be sparing Abraham's feelings. He knows that he's not 20 anymore. It's protecting him from knowing what she thinks about him, is what I hear you saying. He may know that he's old, to your point, but it doesn't matter whether or not he knows that. What she thinks about him also matters, and she's not saying that in front of him, and there might be a reason behind that. Great. I do want to move on, because there's other things that I want to get into, especially the Talmud. What we have in front of us is from Bava Metzia, and it's commenting on the same verse. It says, it is written that Sarah said, and my Lord is old. And it is written, and the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I certainly bear a child, and I am old? This indicates that the Holy One, blessed be God, did not repeat to Abraham that which Sarah actually said, that her husband is old. Why did God change the wording of her statement so that she was referring to herself? The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, peace is of such great importance that even the Holy One, blessed be God, altered the truth for the sake of preserving peace. As it is stated, and Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I am waxed old shall I have pleasure, and my Lord is old. And it is written, and the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I certainly bear a child, and I am old? So what is the Talmud adding in here to Rambam's point? Yeah.
I saw the same thing when I was reading it in Italian. And I actually agree with it, my own experiences. It's better to not be honest than to self-say. That's what the Torah is saying. And, from my own little experience, I would get up in the morning, see the receptionist where I used to work a couple of years ago, and say, boy, you look tired. That was my honest opinion. And, if a person was insulting, they think they look great. So the Torah is right, and the commentator here is also very wrong.
So there's wisdom in not necessarily, if I hear what you're saying, it's not just this wisdom in not necessarily being honest, but it's more so of holding back opinions that aren't going to be helpful.
Exactly.
Perfect. Yeah.
And you sort of almost regurgitating what I said before, but this part of, obviously, I agree with that is referring to the Shalom Bayis part, but beyond that, I don't think it's a question that he's old, and God shouldn't be questioning that Abraham is old. God is questioning only that she is too old to bear a child, even though obviously she feels she's too old. That's not a question that is of issue. It's a partial. He's not focused on the quote fact. He's focused on the thought of fact that's actually going to be turned around and brought to the opposite.
So there's both this focus on Shalom Bayit, and then there's also a focus on why, like, it sounds like you're saying that God is almost concerned. Why does Sarah think that this can't happen, knowing up to this point all the things that has already happened for this couple, that God comes through on God's word, essentially. So it's one thing early on in the Abraham-Sarah story when they're Avram and Sarai, for Avram to question God. God hasn't shown God's ability to follow through, but now that they've seen that God can follow through and that they're protected and whatnot, why should Sarah question herself? Great. Yeah.
Like Abraham, like it's like why can't like what am I gonna do? Okay, here we go. So I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. If Abraham is like not telling the truth that he doesn't like so like it doesn't matter like it's like because Sarah wants to make a miracle into life, and Abraham is like Abraham is like saying to him that he's like saying, oh, like I'm too old.
No, that's not what's going on. She's saying that she thinks that potentially both of them are too old. He's unaware that any of this happened.
Yeah, he's not like truthful. He's not being truthful.
No. God is the one who's not being truthful.
God's not being truthful to Abraham, and everybody has to like follow the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
All I can say, I think I'm the only one qualified here to speak on this issue, but I'm sure that Sarah has told Abraham dozens of times that you're too old and a bunch of other things.
I'm not going there. Let's look at one other. I want to close out so that we have enough time. I want to close with two thoughts. One of them comes from Chizkuni, which actually AJ is going to focus on the question. I put this together earlier in the week and forgot that he also does go into this question of why question Sarah and not Abraham. But it's also going to spell out more of what's going on here. Why is it that she ridiculed, laughed, etc.? So he's going to repeat something that was already repeated earlier up in, I believe, in what we read this morning. If you were to ask why God did not rebuke Abraham when he entertained similar doubts a chapter beforehand, the answer is that seeing Sarah is considered as on a lower spiritual level than her husband. This is Chizkuni saying this. This is not me saying this. It's considered as clear that even if her doubts were criticized, her husband's doubts were deserving of a rebuke even more so, without the need for the Torah to spell this out. And then Chizkuni then uses this parable that when a wise woman wishes to rebuke her daughter-in-law for something that both she and her daughter had been guilty of, she rebukes only her daughter instead, allowing her daughter-in-law to draw the necessary conclusions about her own behavior. In other words, if I want to get a message across, this happens oftentimes in group settings, that if someone did something in a group that was detrimental to the entire group, instead of singling the person out and saying, we don't mix milk and meat together, as one example, or Shlomo, why did you mix milk and meat together? Instead, it will be hey guys, just a reminder, we don't mix milk and meat together. Or calling out someone that can maybe take the heat and won't feel like they're being as criticized for it. If God had rebuked Abraham in Sarah's presence, Abraham would have felt ashamed. God therefore did so in an indirect manner, seeing that I am too old. According to Rashi, the Torah changed what Sarah had actually said out of concern for the harmony existing between Abraham and Sarah, We see the Shalom Bayit again. What Sarah had actually meant was, what good does it do for me to have been rejuvenated as long as my husband cannot be rejuvenated also? In other words, she's actually not questioning where this goes. Is she's actually not questioning her own ability. She's questioning his ability, is what Chizkuni is saying on this. But the bigger thing that Chizkuni is saying is actually that the reason that this gets changed is because of something we saw in the earlier Parsha. God can't call out Avraham directly because for whatever reason, God doesn't think that Avraham can take it. But God thinks that Sarah can take it and can take the heat enough that maybe Avraham will also pick up on the fact that neither of them should be questioning God in this. And that's where I at least see Chizkuni going on this. Yeah, I see a couple of eager hands to comment.
Let me put a slightly different spin.
Yeah.
I would say that maybe he is castigating Abraham here. That originally in last week's Torah portion, Abraham was a little bit wary, and so God explained to him, no, I know you're old, but your descendants will be like the stars in the sky. And then Sarah laughs. So he goes to Abraham and says, wait a second, I already told you last week that you were going to be a father to this great nation. Did you not convey this to Sarah? Why didn't you fill her in on the secret, Why did you keep this a secret from her?
It's an interesting,
maybe he's castigating her.
It's an interesting read. See, as you're saying that, I still don't hear that as God castigating Sarah. So, but let me rephrase what I heard just so that everyone can hear. So this idea, if I understand correctly, is God has already reassured Abraham that he's going to have a kid after Abraham questioned it not so long ago. And then Sarah laughs at hearing this. Abraham doesn't. And so the question would be that the reason why God is coming to Abraham asking this question around why did Sarah laugh is if I understand what you're saying, there's a presumption that Abraham should have told Sarah that that God told Abraham they're going to have a kid. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah.
So then I would still read that as God castigating Abraham for not passing along the news. Yeah. It's not really getting Sarah in trouble at all.
Exactly.
Regardless, it's a way of calling out Abraham for his actions. It's just a question of, is she calling out Abraham for his actions last week or earlier today in questioning God, or is God calling out Abraham for not sharing God's wonderful news with Sarah? Yeah, so it's a good question about how it turns out though that they're going to live for plenty of time to raise Yitzchak and screw him up plenty in the process. But that's a whole different question. What I want to focus on though is I started this off. I named the source sheet "Divine Permission to Lie," and part of the reason I say that is because Sarah, I think, gets a glimpse of what happens in the interaction between Abraham and God, regardless of whether or not Sarah is actually listening in on this. And I'm going to have to correct myself because it does seem in this moment like God responds to her, even though I said that God doesn't talk to her. I think that this is like one of the only times that it's unclear, but it certainly seems like that, because we're going to skip a verse, and we read 10 through 13, and verse 15, chapter 18 of Genesis says, Sarah lied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was frightened. Came the reply, you did laugh. So it seems like God responds.
Do we know what the subject of the word Vayomer is? Is it Abraham or is it God?
It is unclear, which I think is why this translation says, came the reply. It could be Abraham, it could be God. What? It could be Sarah. Maybe. But regardless, what we see here is God being slightly less than truthful. And I want to say Sarah picking up on that and saying maybe there is a situation in which it's okay to not be truthful. She may not be picking up on what the right situation is, but I think it's an important lesson for all of us that's going to go completely in a different direction than what we were talking about, which is that how we role model certain things is incredibly important with being how we role model certain things is incredibly important with how we're in understanding how we are viewed, because it may not be the way that we think we are. God understands, whatever the reason may be, why it is okay to not be truthful in this scenario, or why it's okay to not be precisely accurate with God's words. I don't know that Sarah does. Regardless of whether or not that's true, Sarah's picking up on the fact that God is not being completely truthful here. And it's an important thing to keep in mind that what we think we're role modeling may not always be what we're actually role modeling. So completely different direction. And I hope we can all at least take that intentionality into this next week and be a little bit more intentional in all of our actions. And also maybe work for Shalom Bayis, whatever that may mean for all of us.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.